Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for this session on regenerative tourism as part of the New Dawn in Travel virtual festival hosted by the Transformational Travel Council. My name is Pamela Dynasty and I will be your host for this panel discussion. I am the Sustainability Ambassador for the TTC based in Squamish, British Columbia in Canada, and also the founder and director of Mosaic Earth Travel, a small group travel company here in BC. We're here today to talk about regenerative tourism within the context of transformational travel. We'll work to uncover some practical strategies and tools for us as travelers, as well as for tourism businesses, to really use the principles of regeneration as a means to make net positive contributions to the well-being of visitors, residents, host communities, and the environments where we're traveling. As travel resumes post-pandemic, we're seeing that trends are predicting that travelers will be planning experiences with more intention and mindfulness. Booking.com recently published a report called The Future of Travel, citing an impact awakening as one of the travel trends, the key travel trends of 2021. In their research study of more than 20,000 travelers across 28 countries, they found that 52% of global travelers want to travel more sustainably in the future. 2/3 of respondents indicated that they want their travel choices to also support the destination's recovery efforts from the pandemic. And more than half want to see how their money is going back to the local community. Showing us these trends may well be paving the way for more regenerative forms of tourism. As travel professionals and travelers ourselves, we have the opportunity to support more purposeful, impact-driven experiences and help to really cultivate that regenerative mindset for the health of our planet and its people. So I'm honored today to be joined by 4 incredible panelists that will help us really dive in and explore this topic further. So to start, we have Laura Storm, who's the founder of Regenerators. She's the co-author of Regenerative Leadership, previously co-founded Sustainia. She's part of the Copenhagen Climate Council and World Business Summit on Climate Change, Green Biz World Changer, and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She works on projects that help aid awareness around regenerative design, leadership, and living. We also have Michelle Holliday. She is the author of The Age of Thrivability, Vital Perspectives and Practices for a Better World. She is a consultant specializing in systems change at community and organizational levels, helping people discover ways to feel more alive, to connect more meaningfully with each other, and to serve life more powerfully through their work. We also have Deirdre Sherlin. She's the policy advisor in sustainable development for the United Nations Environment Program. She's also the former coordinator of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Tourism, led by the UNEP, and an experienced tourism and environment consultant and project manager for UNEP, UNDP, UNESCO, and IUCN initiatives. And finally, we have Brian T. Mullis. He is the founder of Sustainable Travel International, board member of the Transformational Travel Council, and advisor to national tourism boards, including the Rwanda Tourism Board, and recently director of the Guyana Tourism Authority. So our panel today brings an incredibly diverse and excellent range of knowledge and experience to the table. So without further ado, we will dive in. To set the stage, I want to begin our discussion by talking a bit about what we mean by regeneration and regenerative tourism and how this differs from sustainable tourism. So in a recently published white paper, The Regenerative Travel Principles for Hospitality, Anna Pollock describes how we really need to make a fundamental leap in realizing the interdependence, interconnectivity, and dynamic nature of everything. We all need to recognize that tourism is a complex system that resides within and depends on a much more complex living system. So starting with Michelle, I wonder if you can dive in for us with your deep experience. How do you define regeneration within the context of tourism?
All right, thank you, Pam, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm going to give a pretty short but big and high-level answer to your question about what regeneration is, and I trust that together we'll come to a balance of big picture and groundedness. So the starting point for me is to recognize that regeneration is something that only something that's alive can do. Only a living system is capable of regenerating itself, generating itself, renewing itself, and healing itself. So this term represents the shift from thinking of tourism as if it's a conveyor belt and a mechanism that we can control and manage in every way, and instead seeing it as something more like a garden, an ecosystem that we can steward and cultivate. And what is being regenerated is most of all the hosting community, including the community of all life that are contained within it. So the last two things I'll say is that within that view, our role shifts from being managers and mechanics of the conveyor belt to being those gardeners and stewards. And our goal shifts from just growing volume and gross revenue to cultivating the fertile conditions for life to thrive at every level. It becomes regeneration or healing and renewal of people and place.
Thank you. That was a great place to start. And Laura, I want to turn to you. Can you expand on this and describe for us what regeneration and regenerative tourism means for you and how this differs from sustainability?
I very much resonate with what Michelle just started to explore. It's a beautiful metaphor to see the hospitality sector as stewards of a garden rather than a mechanistic conveyor belt. I really like that metaphor. And maybe I can add by just sharing a concrete example. A few years ago, I was invited to the launch of a new fantastic sustainable conference center. And they were so incredibly proud about their wastewater management system, their use of electricity and solar panels everywhere. And they had done a really, really great job. But they have not factored in that they are actually ecosystem facilitators of a place, and that everything within their system is a potential acupuncture point for sustainable and regenerative change. So for example, in their restaurants, they were not serving organic food, and the furniture was not in any way done sustainably or regeneratively. So it was more the kind of, it was more the shell that they had won prizes for, because they had, this conference center has won a lot of prizes, but the soul was missing. And that attitude of everything that goes in and out is a potential acupuncture point. So we need to make sure we provide conditions for life to thrive throughout our ecosystem. So the food we serve on our table, the furniture, the gardens, but also how are we treating our staff and our employees? Are we treating them respectfully? And are we seeing this eco center as a focal point, generative ripple effects that can change systems far beyond that kind of tangible place and physical place? So yes, I very much concur with what Michelle just shared, and just wanted to offer that as an example of many kind of sustainable conference centers and so-called eco resorts. They're missing the soul, and they're missing kind of like the aliveness to everything that they're doing, and they don't have that understanding and that consciousness of us being stewards of life and stewards of place.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had seen examples like that, that when you're developing a hotel or tourism experience in a destination, really needing to look at the history of the place, consider the longer term, even geological, cultural history, and how you fit within that and can help bring it to the future sustainably.
Yeah, but also how do you make your guest feel? Is it just, I've been to a hotel in London as well that has been won a lot of awards, but when you enter it, it's just like artificial lighting, and it's just like, it doesn't make you feel good. How does this place that we are offering make you feel, make our guests feel?
Absolutely. Great. And then Deirdre, I want to turn to you, and from your perspective, why is it important that we focus more on this regenerative tourism rather than simply sustainable tourism as we enter this restart of travel in the coming months and years?
Thank you, Pamela, and greetings to my fellow panelists, and thank you so much for having me in this conversation. And my perspective is one who takes the policies and the strategies and implements at the destination. So, and you know, one of the things I think that humanity has had to grapple with this past year, which has brought so much, I guess our lives have come to front and center. It has changed. COVID-19 has injured us in so many ways, you know, the jobs, the loss of jobs, family connections that were separated, the lifestyles that were disrupted, norms, value systems, everything disrupted. The industry, tourism sector or industry, completely disrupted. Perhaps one of the most disrupted industries of all the productive sectors, according to the statistics that I have seen. And the language of regeneration, of regenerative tourism, resonates very deeply with me. And Laura used a term there, which I completely agree with, soul. And we've had to go back to what is our essence, what's our soul. And for those who believe or are into the creation story, as very much I am, that's my background. And man was created on the sixth day, the last of the created things of God. And the plants and animals, the sky, the sea, the land, all these things came before man. But man was given this responsibility to till and to care for creation. And we seem to have lost that connection and that understanding. And I think the language of regenerative tourism takes us back to that elemental being, that we are part of nature. We are part of the created space, essentially. So we really have to get back, and especially, and for me at least, COVID has brought all of this reality right back front and center for me. And we have to get back to what gives us that connection to this created space, the natural space, the social space, the built up space. How are we using the resources that were gifted to us as part of this creative space, essentially? So we really have to reformulate our values, okay? And from the context of tourism and the hotels, which are the most recognizable icon of the industry itself, has now to think, well, how can I make the indoors outdoors? How can I make the outdoors more oriented towards that gift of creation, that natural space? Whether I'm located in the city, am I breathing clean air, drinking clean water, having those connections to the life of the city, or whether it's deep within the forests and you're connecting to a more the essence and the soul of the created spirits. Essentially, I'm speaking in language that's not necessarily used by a lot of people who implement and design. But speaking of design, the other thing that the destination now has to face, and this is a great opportunity coming out of all the darkness of COVID and the death and despair that we suffered the past year, and perhaps are still going through it, essentially. And that is that sense of space and that sense of place. And in the regenerative terms, it's called the history of the place. We need to get back into that, you know, and to begin to tap into the views that's just past, or it's more than just looking under the hood to make sure that the engine is properly revved up. We now have to go back and formulate new designs, new design thinking, look at the staff and the local people, look at the cultures in which the destination wants to develop, the experiences that we'd like to share, and not just for the travelers, but as people who plan, design, develop, and produce an offering and a product that others will want to see. So I'll stop here now, but my views are deeply connected to the destination and the experiences, and you know, post-COVID, where do we need to go? The thinking, how do we reestablish that connection that resides very deep in our souls and that we need to start living through it again? Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. That's great. And then further diving into more practical examples as well. So one important role, as you guys have discussed, that regenerative tourism can play is to aim to go one step beyond sustaining the status quo and actually repairing the harm that's already been done, particularly with more travelers keen to help generate that net positive impact in the destinations that they visit. So we know that we need to inspire travelers to take this leap. So Laura, starting with you, with your experience in consulting and supporting regenerative leadership, I wonder what tools and strategies you commonly recommend for business leaders that are looking to integrate those regenerative principles and behavior within their own business.
Well, what I have offered in collaboration with my co-author Giles Hutchins, we co-authored the book Regenerative Leadership together, and that builds around the DNA of regenerative business, regenerative organizations, and that's a framework that I would love to collaborate with you guys on. How can we translate that into the tourism sector? It can already now be used because as a tourism industry, you're also a business. And the DNA consists of three main elements: living systems design, which means how can we tap into biomimicry? How can we tap into the circular economy? How do we make sure that everything we do is life affirming? And how do we work as ecosystemic designers? So we take everything in our ecosystem into account when we design our place and our services. The second element is living systems culture. How can we make sure that our operations is including diversity? Nature thrives and banks on diversity, and that's such a critical DNA strand for us to create thriving organizations. It's also important that we have a really strong mission and purpose. It's also really important that we tap into the potential of a really strong interconnected relationship and actually see ourselves not as an isolated island, but see ourselves as a strong ecosystem where we need to focus on how we can ensure inbuilt resiliency into our organizational design, rather than what we have seen now, which has a lot of inbuilt fragility. And the third element is living systems being. How do we make sure that we offer places that is also catering to biophilic design? How can we tap into or provide circumstances and environments that are really nurturing for our souls and our senses, that is really intriguing and that is regenerating us when we come and visit? How can we make sure that we offer organizations and places that is based on nature's cycles and seasons? So we have spots where people can go and be in their inner autumn and winter, or we have places where people can seed and be in their inner spring and summer. So those are some of the DNA strands that we cover in the third kind of element of the DNA model. It's of course a lot more detailed than that, but that's a framework where you can there's also a DNA assessment wheel, so you can assess your organization. To what extent are we regenerative now? And what can I do in concrete steps that will make my organization a lot more regenerative? So that's a tool that I would recommend people got their head around, to have this holistic understanding of what regenerative really means. It's not just about new sustainability metrics. It's about a new attitude of being an ecosystem facilitator.
Great, very well said. And Michelle, how do you recommend tourism businesses adopt and encourage regenerative mindset in travelers as well, to help facilitate these more mindful, impact-driven experiences?
Mm-hmm. Well, I love where this conversation has gone. It's a delight that we've gone really into the depths of what's involved in embracing a regenerative mindset. And I'm not quite ready to go to the travelers yet. I think there's more to the conversation that's needed about the tourism businesses themselves and the host communities. I think when we address that level, then the offering and the invitation to visitors becomes naturally one of an invitation into a regenerative experience. So I would still focus on tourism businesses dedicating themselves to the learning about what it means to be regenerative. And I love that Laura is, and in fact Deirdre is as well, pointing to the practices and tactics, but there's also some depth and some personal work as well to shift our understanding of our role and our goals if we're going to support the healing and renewal of people and place. So I would stay focused there. And secondarily, after kind of dedicating ourselves to the learning that's needed, I would say tourism businesses need to find others in their community, other tourism organizations, and also people in other sectors and even residents, to have bigger conversations together and over time about who they are together, what they care about, and what they want for themselves, for their place, for their visitors, and for the world, and what has to be true if they're going to get what they want, if they're going to create a healed and renewed and thriving place. So I'll give you one example. I'm working with Tourism Northern Ireland over the past few months, and they have really a world-class approach to local clusters that meet regularly. And in their case, at this time, it's tourism-related businesses, but they meet regularly over several years for the purpose of building that sense of shared identity and relationship. And then from what I think of as the fertile soil of community, new offerings emerge that are necessarily more regenerative because they're rooted in a sort of healed and renewed community.
Thank you. That's a great point of keeping at that higher level, starting with, the regenerative mindset at the business and destination level will then feed down into regenerative experiences, more deep experiences for the traveler as well. Brian, I want to turn to you. We haven't heard from you yet. With your experience with the Transformational Travel Council, while we're gathered here today, if you want to dive into your thoughts on how transformational travel can be a tool to support regenerative outcomes.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to speak alongside all of our fellow presenters here today. I think in looking at, first and foremost, some of the interrelationships between regenerative tourism and transformational travel to help to answer this question, they both reflect an evolution or maturation of tourism and what it can be, not sustaining what is, as has been touched on, but evolving to what can and ultimately should be. Both concepts are centered on thrivability, revitalization. I think the informed and intention practice of creating the fertile conditions for all life to thrive at all levels, and in many ways that starts at an individual level. Nonetheless, both concepts are holistic. They're about health, wholeness, and well-being at all levels, personal, community, and planet. In transformative travel, much like regenerative tourism, we're focused on creating the conditions for all life to thrive. We can't guarantee that change will happen, but we can, in transformational travel, create those conditions to help people change mindsets. As was mentioned previously, from this ruthless focus on more and more visitors and the revenue that they represent, as a small example, to shifting to the value that each traveler represents, not only monetarily, but how are they driving positive social and conservation outcomes as part of their visits. We see more travelers, as you had shared with the statistics at the beginning from booking.com, that are starting to think and look for these types of experiences. And with transformational travel, if we're creating the conditions for behavioral change that they can bring home, then they can help to drive that demand that's going to make it easier for the tourism businesses and the ecosystem to be able to evolve as well as they respond to that market demand, because we will have early adopters in regenerative tourism, as we're already seeing with Northern Ireland, as Michelle mentioned, and Hawaii is doing some great work, and New Zealand and others in this space. But I think a lot of people are going to be stuck on that business case, and for them, transformational travel again can help to foster that shift in mindsets, and people begin to see that tourism can be a vehicle to create net positive travel impact. With everybody really, again, playing an important role in contributing to resident, community, visitor, and ultimately environmental well-being as a part of the outcomes for travel.
Thank you, Brian. And Deirdre, I'd love your perspective as well. What sort of strategies, tools you've seen in your work with both destinations and businesses as well, and examples you've seen of businesses and destinations that are pursuing that regenerative, sustainable tourism operations, and what you're seeing is most effective.
Yeah. Well, the perspective comes from the years of work in sustainability as opposed to regenerative tourism. Regeneration is a fairly new concept, I think, for me anyway. And I can see its future application in very short order along the terms that some of my colleagues have already pointed out in today's panel. But tourism also is blessed because of the work sustainability in the UN system of which I'm part of. And over the years, over the decades, perhaps if we want to put a pin on it, it really started to emerge in the early 1990s, 1992, after the World Conferences. So Laura mentioned the circular economy, which is one of the latest evolutionary tools that's now available. And from the UN perspective, there is developed now a lot of hotspot analyses kind of tools, essentially, which takes a 360-degree look at how we use resources, the four principal ones being water and energy and raw materials and the waste that is generated from there. So we're now looking at how we can use waste and repurpose it, reuse it, so that it becomes an input into another cycle, another productive cycle, essentially. But then we also have a lot of tools, existing tools, that where we focus on the person, the individual, their culture, their setting, their needs for a living wage, for decent work, for how they fit into that. And tourism, I think of all the sectors that I have worked in, has had a little bit of a colorful track record in terms of its labor issues and how it deals with it. And there are lots of standards, ethical standards, as well as codes of behavior and so on, that are going to be relevant, I think. One of the things that I think at the destination level, we need to get better at doing, there are tons of strategies and policies and sustainable policies and codes of ethics. The implementation side is a little bit weak. And the project management structure and the tools that come out of that practice are still quite relevant in terms of planning, of doing, of checking, of measuring, of replanning, to make sure it's a circular thing and that we don't think that it starts today and stops tomorrow. So there are lots of tools, I think, that businesses have looked. They will always have. One of the things I learned with working with hotels back in the days of working through the Caribbean is that they will, and across the globe, they will always be focused on the bottom line. They have to generate a profit. They have to look at the investment over periods of time, usually 10 years or so, 7 to 10 years. They have to refresh their product all the time. So the financial statements, the performance statements and so forth will always be the tools that are necessary. But I think that coming out of the regenerative practice, and one of the things that I would like to see, and that was impressed upon me when I read the white paper, is going back to these 5 senses. And we have a tendency, I think, in this industry to use or to underutilize the 5 senses that we were given. So we might focus on sight, how things are designed and how they look in their space. That's great. We might focus on the smell and foods and the aromatherapies, the health and wellness sector of things. We might even focus on touch, making sure that the things that touch us most, the connection with people going on holiday. But I think we really have to look at all 5 senses if we are to connect, go back to the elements and connect and be part of the soulful experience. How are we designing? How are we generating products and experiences based on the 5 senses? And incidentally, I did a check this morning and I really had to laugh at myself. I didn't even know that we've now gone from 5 to 7 senses, which makes some sense. The 6th one is movement. How does man move within his environment? And then the second one, which I still have to do some more research on, is all about body positioning, your sensitivities about your parts. I imagine this is part of the health and wellness story as well. But nonetheless, this language really does resonate. And I think that if we find some way, and this is something that I would be very interested in working on, of developing some tools that involves all the senses of man as part of a 360 evolutional view of things, to figure out how we use the resources as gift, how we develop the offering as gift domestically, so that our communities are part of this essential story and service, which would then provide the attraction in new ways even, and with new experiences for the traveler. Over.
That's great. I feel like you introduced some really, really interesting points there. I wonder if Michelle or Laura or even Brian has anything they wanna add to that.
I would love to, actually. Deirdre, what you were just saying at the end reminds me of a conversation I had over the weekend with Andy Middleton, who is in Wales and is quite a leader in tourism. He runs a successful tourism operation, and he's quite influential in the industry within Wales and beyond. And he shared a statistic that 64%, and I don't have the exact details, but it's something like 64% of CEOs who made a change to grow the sustainability efforts of their organizations, 64% of them credited a conversation that they had at home. Like, they made the change after having a conversation about sustainability at home. And what I heard in that was that there are very few places in society where we can have conversations in which we are able to be wholehearted and whole-bodied. This is where, Deirdre, I'm hearing something similar in what you're saying, and whole citizened. There are few places where we can show up that way in the current kind of dominant paradigm. One of them is at home, and the other is on holiday. And that isn't to say that when we're on holiday, we're necessarily going to talk about sustainability, but we are often invited to be wholehearted and whole-bodied and whole citizened. And in that way, we are able to reconnect with the forgotten parts of our humanity and face the reality of our situation, the situation in the world and how dire it is, face our own responsibility for it, and maybe find the courage to do something, to act. So I think this is part of the kind of the invitation that regenerative approaches to tourism hold, that tourism can serve that purpose of holding visitors in a more profound way. And in that way, it might be an indirect influence, but it's there. We can trust that it's there. Just wanted to add that to what you were saying, Deirdre.
I would just quickly add that, when we talk about creating the conditions for a shift in mindset, I think Deirdre spoke to it really well. It is engaging those 5 to 7 senses in such a way that, to Michelle's point, when you're on holiday, then if you're exposed to new ideas and ways of doing things, and all your senses are engaged, then the likelihood of a bit of a mindset shift or a substantive one is much more probable or possible.
And
Yes,
Pam, if we have some time. Oh, sorry.
Go first, Deirdre.
No, I was going to say one of the best experiences I had in my young life was walking through the forests in Trinidad. I was always afraid of a snake because in Trinidad, a little island, but we have all the big snakes of South America. And always very particular about where I'm placing my feet. And I remember going with a forest ranger from the forestry division in Trinidad. And he said to me, okay, forget all of those fears. I know, I understand. It's thing. Just stop a minute and listen. And we were out early in the morning, and it was incredible, the sound of the forest. And you can hear the birds, of course, the birds, the sounds of the birds got less intense because of the time of day. And then if we as we walked a little further, we heard the howler monkeys in the background, we heard something else. And I remember very early in my career being just fascinated by the sound of the forest, or you can hear the mud volcanoes. I don't know if anybody have ever experienced a mud volcano, but it's very typical in Trinidad because of the oil and gas that we have there. There's the gas and the steam that comes to the surface and brings all the sediment. But hearing it from afar and then walking towards it, amazing experiences. The same with if you've ever snorkeled or dived, there's a silence in the ocean. And you can either hear the gentle movement of your body as it with the fin or the breathing through the tubes. But there's just something so magical about that. And I remember in the days when I was working with the Caribbean hotels, trying to get through, Brian, the Green Globe certification and the protection of the reefs and the whole narrative around that. The only change we were able to make in some of the hotel managers and operators when we took them diving, and they saw for themselves, or snorkeling, and they saw for themselves the condition of the reefs that people were only able to talk about or describe in slideshows. So again, it's that connection, that experience. When you hear things, it really woke up my senses as a youngster. And I think that sometimes I need to get back into that, whether it's on holiday or being here at home with my family in the year of COVID. But I think it's a very interesting time and an opportunity for tourism, and I really hope we don't miss it this time around.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Just another similar experience was I was part of a process engaging business executives in the negotiations of the successor to the Kyoto Protocol. So leading up to COP21 in Paris. And part of that process was that we went to the Arctic Circle with Christiana Figueres, who is the executive secretary of the UNFCCC process, and lead negotiators and business executives. And we were in that really, really special environment for 4 days together, no internet perception, no Wi-Fi, no anything, but us holding space for another kind of quality conversations where there was an allowed to speak from the heart instead of just the head about positionings and launches of whatever white paper, but it was really deep and sincere. And Christiana Figueres really had that quality in her personality of holding space for something new to emerge. And being surrounded by glaciers and ice that were melting at rapid speed was such a profound experience for especially business executives from countries very far from the Arctic Circle. So I think that quality of regenerative practitioners, of knowing how to hold space for emergence and having that quality where there's spaces that you have all spoke to that allows more soul, that allows us to feel like whole human beings, that's our portal, that's our access, that's our entry point for something new to emerge. And that's the kind of conversation at a really deep level that needs to happen in the tourism sector right now. How can we be space holders for a new frequency within tourism to emerge?
And can I add something to that? Could we have a conversation? This is fantastic. I love that. I love that. I write and talk often about how tourism organizations, national and regional tourism organizations, need to take on a new role beyond destination marketing organizations and beyond even destination management organizations, and to see themselves as hosting the hosts. So bringing people together in hosting communities in these kinds of powerful and transformative conversations. This is the most vital role and contribution that they can play. And we always want to get to the action. Just tell me the tools and tactics, right? And conversation sounds so fluffy and light, but there's nothing as powerful and transformative as a well-hosted conversation among people who care about the same place and the same things, and who are supported in discovering that deeper connection and what's possible. So I really love that story, Laura. That's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This is great. And that kind of brings us to our final session, and you know, still looking at that bigger picture. And you mentioned, Michelle, about partnership and collaboration, and Laura as well about needing to see ourselves within that interconnected system and working together. So I'll turn back to Brian and look to you for some tools, how we can collaborate across the growing regenerative tourism movement in a really meaningful way on a global scale, recognizing that, governments, DMOs, industry stakeholders, nonprofits, and travelers all have a role to play.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that if we look at, as you mentioned, Pam, at the beginning of your introduction, that tourism is a complex system, which within a much, much more complex system, we know at a minimum that at most destinations, there's multiple ministries responsible for tourism and commerce and all kinds of different things. And that collaboration between them is a prerequisite, but not only between them, between all the other players within that system, the travel trade, of course, nonprofits, the travelers themselves, etc. The historical focus to date has been on driving shareholder value. And we know when we work at a systems level that we can at least unlock value for all the various stakeholders to where everybody benefits. But if we do a really good job with collaboration, we can unlock that ever so desired systems value. I think that one of the challenges in the sustainable tourism movement is that there's a really fragmented approach. A lot of players, mostly smaller, really doing a lot of great work, but not a lot of resources that are available because sustainability kind of seems to fall on the back burner in terms of priorities. So what we've been looking at the Transformational Travel Council, in collaboration with groups like the Global Initiative for Regenerative Tourism and conversations with people like Anna Pollock and others, is can we create some principles for regenerative tourism? And in the case of the TTC, can we create principles for destinations? Not static standards or anything like that, but guiding principles to help people to work through the process. So how we're trying to foster collaboration is through what we're calling a transformative destinations program, in which we would walk destinations through the principles, get their feedback, recognizing that they will always evolve, and open up the dialogue, as Michelle said, for having those deep, meaningful conversations as hosted by the host at a destination level to bring all those stakeholders together using their convening power, and also training local people on how to foster transformational travel experiences as part of the offering. But importantly, engaging as many professionals that are leading work at a destination level in sustainability and regeneration so that we can get as many practitioners involved in supporting this work, because I think we all recognize that we need to make a shift, and we need to make that shift sooner than later. So ultimately, we need to work together to help to make that possibility a reality.
Thank you, Brian. And Deirdre, similarly with your experience at the destination level, if you can give some examples of strategies for collaboration, that systems level value that you've seen to be successful in implementing these initiatives.
Yeah, well, back in the days when I was working with the Caribbean Hotel Association and specifically directing the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, we always had champions. And, I'm so pleased to see that some of those champions have remained. There's a longevity in there. And particularly, one example I like to give is some of the colleagues and the champions in Aruba, of all places. Mass tourism, cruise, huge cruise industry, huge stayovers, casino product, etc. But within that sea of humanity, we found properties like the Bukuti Beach Resort. And again, it's the leadership at the level of their leadership, where they early on, back in the 90s when I was working in the region, the leadership of Bukuti, for example, said, our staff, our employees are our asset, invested in their assets, invested in their staff and community, paid them a good wage. They have remained, and I mean, there's a lot of connection through the staff to the community, and providing a level of experiences that does not detract from that excellence, essentially, and that customer value, essentially. So it goes back to value. And certainly in Barbados, we've had a couple of great champions emerging, and we have excellent examples across the region. But something that is capturing my imagination is what's happening in Italy. And most people don't know, but one of the first country I experienced as a youngster going to Europe for the first time was Italy. I spent close to 4 months in Italy, traveling the breadth from north to down to the toe of the boot, sitting in volcanoes, sampling the food, learning about the people, etc. I don't speak Italian very well. And that has always stayed with me. And Italy is one of those countries that has been severely devastated, as you know, by COVID-19. Their communities and their a community of communities, all these communities, this patchwork of communities from north to south, mountain, coast, city, you name it, national parks, etc. And they have some of the big towns, some of the big cities like Rome and Venice, very popular, Milan, a lot, they've gone through this problem with over tourism. And they're beginning post-COVID to start to rethink, because they've seen clear canals. I mean, I've been to Venice and I've not liked the experience at all, because the canals at the time that I went many decades ago smelled filthy, didn't want to get into a gondola because of that reason. And they have been reporting these experiences of clear canal water. They have seen fish, for goodness sake, in the canal. So life has come back, has regenerated. So they're beginning to rethink how they're doing tourism and looking, believe it or not, they're now looking at some of the other satellite towns to try to spread some of the volume, because they do expect, as I do, that it will come back over some period of time. Visitors will come back to these favorite destinations because their culture date back thousands of years. And they do have an offering that's still attractive even to persons like myself. But they're now looking to connect out of these cities. Florence is now looking to Pisa, where I was based on the coast. They have centuries and thousands of years of rivalry. Now they're looking to cooperate and to spread the joy from Pisa to the west, to Livorno, towards the center towards Florence, more towards the center, from Florence down to Bologna, and Bologna out to the coast, onto the east coast of Italy. How can they spread some of the wealth in terms of their art, their culture, their food, their festivals, etc.? That's what we need. And it's a term that in Italy they call albergo diffuso, or sort of a scattered hotel concept, which is in this case, in some of the mountain towns, where a lot of people have left these towns nestled into the mountains. They've abandoned their homes. So a hotel might have its rooms in this particular building within the town, and about a block away, they've got the restaurant, or 2 blocks away is some other component of the hotel, and all of these dispersed aspect of it constitute hotels. But guess what? They're now more integrated with a community. I love that. I don't think it's appropriate for every destination, obvious, but this kind of innovative thinking, and I've been spending some time on the websites of some of the hotel groups, the indigenous hotel groups in Italy, that's looking at this concept. These places now have been abandoned, and when you abandon buildings and homes in a city, you create this sort of dead space and dead zone. They're bringing it back to life. This is regeneration at its essence, essentially. And at the same time, the locals that have remained or that are being attracted back, they're employing them to provide that experience of food integrated with the history of this little town, nestled so far into it. So I haven't finished my research on it, but it really is a concept that is absolutely compelling to me anyway. And it's going back, I think, to using all these senses that are so fundamental to the human experience to recreate or regenerate the product in a way that perhaps myself, it would be very interesting for me to go back and experience this concept albergo diffuso. I so look forward to going back to Italy the first opportunity I get, and to going deep into these communities to see what that feels like. Over.
Thank you, Deirdre. That was great. And Michelle, as well, from you, what strategies you've seen to engage diverse stakeholders to support that common agenda and really drive that collective impact?
Mm-hmm. So the strategy Anna Pollock and I are using in Northern Ireland and most of all in New Zealand really ties into what Deirdre is just saying, actually. Deirdre, you talked about life coming back and coming back to life. You talked about the integration of restaurants and hotels and other offerings into the community. So we are offering a 10-week course, and really it's a 10-week hosted conversation that's called Back to Life. and we've offered it to 7 regions within New Zealand. The regional tourism organizations signed up for it, and then it's made available to their communities. And so 150 people have signed up, and these are staff of the regional tourism organizations. They are operators and government officials. And there's a rhythm of conversation and learning to discover together what is their shared story, the shared vision and purpose that they have for their part of New Zealand. It's an invitation to care for their place and for each other. And it's a supportive structure of relationship and conversation to enable experimentation and contribution and care. So our belief is that this is a really powerful and effective strategy.
Thank you, Michelle. And Laura, do you have anything to add to this as well?
I think you have all, summed it up quite beautifully, and it's really exciting, the work that you're doing with Anna, Michelle, and it will be really interesting findings that come out of that experiment, and I'm curious to see how we can replicate that to other regions, because it brings us back to that importance of space holding, right? Space holding for emergence, and offering that structure for communities to bind stronger together, for the relationships to form, and to improve on strengthening the carrying capacity for these ecosystems going forward, so they are much more resilient. So really interesting project you have undertaken there.
Thanks, Laura. So that brings us close to the end. I feel like we could keep talking for much longer, but we're limited to our hour. So just, this has been a fantastic conversation, and just want to sort of sum up some of the key things that we've learned today. As Michelle mentioned, the act of traveling really presents the opportunity to be whole-bodied, whole citizened, to really get your senses engaged, to connect with the soul of the place. I love that. I know that's what we're really trying to drive at with the Transformational Travel Council as well, and a lot of these experiences, to have those deeper experiences with the destination and the people, and to more deeply connect, really helps bring out those values. And as Michelle said, helping us to then act on those values as well. And then, as we talked about with the business and destination level, ultimately it starts with us, and developing that regenerative mindset within our own operations will ultimately support regenerative experiences for travelers. And I think a big part of that too is, yes, Laura?
Very quickly, I think part of that space holding, to build on what Deirdre also said, there's also a role for regenerative practitioners in this space to also hold space for what needs to die, and the grief and the sorrow and the trauma that is in this industry as well, because there's so many things that we need to let go of for the new to emerge. And that's also part of what I hope your focus, because it does create hospice workers and that compassion in terms of a lot of things, of all ways that has to die for us to enter a new era. Sorry, I just wanted to include that as well.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Yeah, and then finally, when we were talking about, partnerships and collaboration, the need to work at that systems level, recognizing that we're all part of the interconnected planet. And as Brian said, needing to get as many practitioners involved as possible. I like what Deirdre said, by with that collaboration, able to even combat things like over-tourism and sort of spreading the wealth across the areas. Michelle said at the beginning too, which I really liked, ultimately shifting our mindset from being the managers of the conveyor belt to being the gardeners and stewards, and really strengthening that carrying capacity, as you mentioned, Laura, too, of the ecosystems. This is a fantastic discussion, and I just want to turn it to our speakers now. If you have any sort of final words, if you want to provide your contact information as well, if people have any follow-up questions, maybe we'll start with you, Michelle.
Great conversation, really wonderful. Thank you. And I'm at michelleholiday.com if anyone wants to reach out. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. And Deirdre?
Yeah, I've really had fun today and exchanging with the colleagues on the call here. And I think people are ready for a new experience post-COVID. I really do believe that in my heart of hearts. I am. But there's a bit of a caution because I think we will have the need to feel safe. That we're going to enjoy something that might be slightly different. That's exciting. But we have to pay attention to the safety, the security, and the health and wellness side of things because of the pandemic. Hopefully we won't see another pandemic for another 100 years, not in our lifetimes, but I think we also have to be mindful that we're still operating, pandemic or no, we're still operating in a crisis, and that's with climate change. That's the big risk that still looms, I think, as part of our existence. And I hope that tourism begins to rise. As it rises from the ashes, it takes on a mindset change. It really starts to move towards looking not within, not under the hood, but without. People focused, people centered, go out there into nature, understand how we are part of the ecosystem. So I really, really do hope that the thinking starts to evolve in a way that's not just a few people, but that it spreads far, wide, and deep within this tourism community. So thanks, Pam, and thanks all the colleagues, Laura and Michelle and Brian. It was fantastic exchanging with you today.
Thanks, Deirdre. It's very well said, and thank you for mentioning that. If people want to get in touch with you with any questions, do you have a way to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. Please. I mean, my email is dpshurl@outlook.com, or I'm on Twitter at dpshurl. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. And Brian, any final words from you?
Yeah, I would echo Deirdre's sentiments. It's just been wonderful to have this conversation. I think just the cross-fertilization of ideas learned from my fellow panelists, and hopefully imparted a little bit of wisdom that I've gleaned over the last 30 years, the last 20 of which have been in sustainability. I really do hope that we can see change in our sector, and I think there's a lot of positive signs, but it's just, I think, about conversations like this and opening up others' minds and presenting the opportunity to them and showing them the way. And because more people are asking, I'm interested in regeneration, where do I start? And I think we can all help to answer that question and help to facilitate the process as well. So thank you for this opportunity. Folks want to find me, I'm not too easy to track, or not too difficult to track down. Destinationsustainability.com is my personal website, and Brian at destinationsustainability.com, Brian with an I. Thank you again.
Thanks, Brian. And Laura. Laura, any final words?
Yes, thank you so much for a very lovely panel. I've really enjoyed the vibe and the essence of this, and how we very quickly got into the inner dimensions of this important transformation that we are all doing our role to be stewards of. So thank you so much for initiating this dialogue, and I look forward to hopefully partnering or collaborating in any way, shape, or form we can find out in the future. You can find me on regenerators.co or laurastorm.com. Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And thank you, Michelle, Deirdre, Laura, Brian. This has been an excellent conversation. We're so honored to have you guys here and to really dive into this topic. And I hope everyone that's attending the New Dawn in Travel event has gotten some good tidbits to walk away with, and some good topics to dive into further. So thank you, everyone. And thanks for joining us.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.